Welcome to This Explainer. We are jumping right into a really fascinating breakdown today of Dr. Robert A. Peterson's lecture on Revelation and Holy Scripture. If you've ever found yourself wondering exactly how theologians bridge that massive gap between an infinite creator, our very finite human minds, and the written word, well, you're absolutely in the right place. We're going to look at historical shifts, the different ways God is said to reveal himself, and ultimately the practical posture you actually need to study all these topics.
Okay, let's dive into this. To really ground us before we get into the heavy historical and theological analysis, I want you to consider this amazing quote from St. Augustine. He wrote this centuries ago in his Confessions. He says, "You give us delight in praising you because you have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest in you." It just perfectly captures the emotional anchor of Peterson's lecture, which is this idea that the human pursuit of divine knowledge, it isn't just some dry academic exercise, it's a deeply ingrained longing. Keep that tension of the restless heart in the back of your mind as we start unpacking the historical crisis of Revelation.
So here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll hit the modern revelation crisis. Second, general versus special revelation. Third, knowing the infinite God. Fourth, the attributes of Scripture. And we'll wrap up with number 5, the posture of study. Let's get right to it. Section 1, the modern revelation crisis, looking specifically at the modern shift. Before we look at what Scripture actually claims to be, Peterson draws on Peter Jensen's work to highlight a major historical shift in how biblical authority is viewed in the modern era. And this brilliantly illustrates the whole tension here. On one side, you have pre-Enlightenment orthodoxy. Think of this as an era where the church and scriptural authority really enjoyed this highly favored, protected status. But then, on the other side, we have our current environment, postmodern relativism. Today, claims of Christian revelation literally have to compete in an exceptionally relativistic, pluralistic world. It's an environment where choosing a faith is usually viewed by the culture as being more about, personal style or preference than objective truth. So exclusive claims face an immense amount of hostility. Right in the middle of that postmodern environment, the Protestant evangelical claim stands out really sharply. They maintain an exclusive focus on the Christ of the Bible, and they claim that a direct relationship with God is possible primarily through his inspired word. Peterson impartially notes that these assertions heavily clash with the thinking of current secular culture, and actually even a lot of the broader modern church, just because of their sheer exclusiveness. Moving on to Section 2, types of revelation, specifically general versus special. Now that we've kind of set the stage with the historical crisis surrounding claims of divine knowledge, we need to look at the fundamental theological definitions of how exactly God is said to make himself known to humanity in the first place. The first bucket is general revelation. Basically, this is God making himself known to all people, everywhere, all the time. The classic example of this is the natural world, right? Creation itself pointing to a creator. But, and Peterson points out a really crucial caveat here from the Calvinist perspective, this form of revelation alone is not considered a saving one. Why? Because according to the specific view, human incapacity prevents people from responding appropriately to just the natural world alone. And that brings us to the second bucket, special revelation. This one is defined as God making himself known to some people, in some places, some of the time. You can see how much narrower and highly specific this category is. It encompasses that historical and scriptural focus we talked about earlier, the whole idea that God communicates definitively through the written word of the Bible, and historically through Jesus Christ. It's this special revelation that forms the absolute bedrock for those exclusive evangelical claims we just looked at. All right, Section 3, Knowing God, focusing on the infinite creator. We are really getting to the emotional core of this explainer now. To understand how we actually connect with special revelation, Peterson turns his focus straight to an exegesis of Psalm 139. Here we get this incredibly vivid contrast drawn from King David's writings, the infinite creator versus the finite creature. The source material emphasizes God's completely exhaustive knowledge. I mean, he knows humanity intimately, right from the mother's womb to the grave, even knowing our thoughts before we utter them. In stark contrast, humanity has a superlimited, though genuine, knowledge of God. But what's so beautiful here is the result. David's realization of how finite he is doesn't lead him to despair at all. Actually, it leads him to deep humility, hope, and faith. He knows he can't possibly know God completely, but he takes massive comfort in being completely known by God. Let's jump to Section 4, Scripture Attributes, where we dig into the very nature of the Word. So having just looked at the nature of the infinite God,
We're going to shift gears and focus on the nature of the text itself. And we're drawing heavily from Psalm 119, which is actually the longest chapter in the Bible. Now, what's really interesting about this concept is the structure behind it. Peterson explains that Psalm 119 is essentially an acrostic poem. It serves as the Bible's most intense, focused meditation on itself. Throughout this really massive text, the author uses 8 major, very distinct terms just to refer to Scripture. We're talking instruction or law, word, decrees, precepts, statutes, promises, commands, and judgments. This sheer variety of terms just goes to show you how absolutely central the text was to the worldview of the author.
But wait, it goes further. The psalm doesn't just name Scripture, it actively characterizes it. It attributes these incredibly profound qualities to it, calling it righteous, good, just, true, pure, enduring, reliable, wondrous, and trustworthy. Peterson points out a theological detail here that is just absolutely crucial. The psalm assigns the exact same attributes to the Word as it does to God himself. So the text and the character of the divine are presented as totally, inextricably linked. That creates a really powerful, unshakable foundation for a believer's worldview.
And finally, Section 5, the posture of study, looking at how we approach the text. Okay, so we've spent some time establishing what Scripture is, both historically and theologically. Now we shift to the really actionable part. How should an individual actually approach studying this text? Let's move to Lava and see how this builds a whole framework for the learner. According to Peterson's analysis of Psalm 119, studying theology can't just be some dry academic endeavor. It requires whole-person integration. You've got to engage the mind through diligent searching. You have to prepare the heart with love and longing. You must use the lips for praise and gratitude. And you actually have to move the feet, meaning you walk out that holiness and obedience in real life. It's a holistic, all-encompassing commitment.
To sort of break up our analysis of all these required postures, Peterson introduces this wonderfully counterintuitive observation from the reformer Martin Luther. I love this. Luther says, the main thing to make you a theologian is grievous trials. It's a pretty striking thought, isn't it? Luther argued that you honestly don't truly understand the sweetness, the power, or the comfort of the text until you are practically driven to it by humility, opposition, and profound personal struggle. Basically, the trial itself is the classroom.
Wrapping up Peterson's really deep dive into Psalm 119, he highlights an extensive list of required postures for studying the Word. And it includes expected things, right? Prayer, diligence, humility. But consider some of the more surprising elements on this list. Delight. Studying should actually bring you joy. Community. We learn indirectly through one another. We're not meant to do it alone. And perhaps the wildest one, tears. The text speaks of being genuinely grieved, literally shedding tears over broken laws and a world that ignores these divine instructions. It is a deeply, intensely emotional engagement.
So the crucial point is this. Engaging with these complex truths isn't just about reading a book. It's a completely immersive experience. We've seen the historical claims, we've walked through the theological definitions, and we've unpacked the intense personal requirements laid out by these texts. So I want to leave you with a thought, a real question to reflect on. Knowing that understanding the infinite God requires a whole-person commitment, how does your personal posture of study actually align with the rigorous, emotional, and holistic demands we just explored? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and hey, keep learning.